experiences is our truth, as our truth. Okay, take 3. Hi, my name is Zion Campbell, and this is the start of my audiobook series. This book is Your Story is Your Power, Free Your Feminine Voice, and it's by Ellie Luna and Susie Herrick. I got it as a gift. We are volcanoes. When we women offer our experiences as our truth, as human truth, all the maps change. There are new mountains. That's what I want, to hear you erupting. When you young Mount St. Helens who don't know the power in you, I want to hear you. So it's divided into 5 parts, and I'll be reading the introduction. We shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started, and know the place for the first time. T.S. Eliot, a poet. Whether we realize it or not, we define ourselves through stories. Understanding your own story is the key to understanding yourself, your world, and your capacity to act within that world. In the heart of your story, you will find you, your voice, your power, and your truth. And because there is only one of you, and you are unique in all of time, your story can be known and expressed only by you. And we need your story, your point of view, and your feminine power more now than ever. We are at a juncture where we need women's voices, women's intelligence, women's compassion, and women's courage to help us navigate the difficult challenges that our special and our planet face, that our species and our planet face. We use the word woman to apply to anyone who identifies with being a woman, regardless of their birth sex. When we say feminine, we are speaking to the feminine energy that lives in everyone. It is our deepest hope that this book will guide you to the center of your story so that you can share your voice and your true gifts with the world. The labyrinth is an ancient metaphor for this journey. That's what this is. It's the labyrinth. And it is the organizing principle for this book. The point of a maze is to find its center. The point of a labyrinth is to find your center. In a labyrinth, there are no roadblocks or tricky turns. The path flows continuously like water, spiraling and meandering as it goes. It is not a direct line from one point to another, but an organic, evolving process that takes time, and it moves to its own rhythm. Similarly, the path through this book is designed to help you spiral to the center of your story, then out again, giving you ways to digest what you discover and to create space for new insights to emerge. May the meandering, renewing, and turning path of your story continue to guide you, as it has guided us home. With love, Ellie and Susie. That was the short introduction, so I'm actually just going to do part 1. How we got here. The most powerful person in the world is the storyteller. The storyteller sets the vision, values, and agenda of an entire generation that is to come. Steve Jobs, as recounted by Thomas Higbee, journalist. Stories live inside you and shape your life. But why? What were the earliest stories you heard that hooked you? What compelled you to want to hear them again and again? What inspired you to share them with others, perhaps even your own children, passing those stories on throughout time, giving the stories life? The most enduring tales tap into something larger than mere entertainment. They literally help us evolve. We warm our hands on stories, both historical and imagined, all while taking in essential information. What is right? What is wrong? How do many heroes and heroines overcome difficult situations? Which lessons will help me? The sharing of fairy tales from generation to generation is among the most enduring methods for creating and sustaining culture. What does that mean for us? For women, much of our early collective education resides in these tales. It is as though each of us is given a recipe that shows us what to do to create a successful life, as well as how to behave to get that life. The characters, attributes, and themes of all these well-known tales socialize us from a very young age, shaping our earliest ideas of who we are, what our culture values in us, and who we feel we ought to become if we want to find our own happily ever after. As women throughout time grapple with the directives for happily ever after, we watch the story, we learn from the story, and, unless challenged, we will, in time, live the story. So what's the story? For girls, the earliest and oldest story is often a fairy tale. What young girl or woman today isn't intimately familiar with Cinderella, Beauty and the Beast, Snow White? Recipe for Cinderella. Find fairy tale godmother, be pretty, get prince, become queen. In the classic fairy tale Cinderella, a beloved daughter is orphaned, adopted, and turned into an indentured servant while everyone else gets to go to the ball. With the help of a fairy godmother, a dress, and a famous pair of shoes, Cinderella goes to the ball and is so beautiful that the handsome young prince falls in love with her. Despite the jealousy of her stepmother and stepsisters, Cinderella gets the prince, becomes a princess, and is lifted out of her painful life of manual labor. Recipe for Belle in Beauty and the Beast. Sacrifice yourself. Be beautiful. Use sexuality. Be demure. Get prince. Another classic tale is Beauty and the Beast. The main character, Belle, beautiful in French, is also a beauty. She finds herself in a horrible situation. Her beloved father is imprisoned by the cruel, arrogant Beast, so she sacrifices herself and becomes the Beast's prisoner in exchange for her father's release. Beast frightens Belle and is cruel to her, but he develops feelings for her. Trapped in an abusive relationship, Belle uses her beauty, sexuality, and submissive spirit to turn Beast into a kinder man, with whom she eventually falls in love. Recipe for Snow White. Be beautiful, be slim, wait for prince, get prince. Finally, Snow White. Like the other women, Snow White is slim, demure, and physically attractive, but her beauty makes her stepmother jealous. This conflict creates the central plot of the story. Multiple attempts are made to murder the girl. I don't know this word. Asphyxiating her with a corset, putting out a bounty on her head, and finally poisoning an apple, of which Snow White takes a bite. Ultimately, a handsome young man, who also happens to be a prince, falls in love with the girl because, once again, she's beautiful. He kisses her while she is unconscious, obviously without her consent, and brings her back to life. When a culture's most popular stories demote women to beautiful housekeepers, what does a young girl begin to feel society values in her? With the main plot points laid out plainly, we can't help but wonder why these foundational stories are centered on a woman who has no capacity to take care of herself and needs a prince to come take care of her. As women, is that our collective happily ever after? As a woman, do we see that these fairy tales are a part of the brainwashing of women? Do we call the bluff? Do we write our own children's books or craft our own nursery rhymes? As girls, we are simply too young to know any better. Do we begin to believe that we need to strive to be like Cinderella? Do we get carried along in the fun songs and the parts that we do like, all while sweeping the stories that don't seem quite right under the rug? We might not like to think we're susceptible to conditioning from something as innocent as a fairy tale, but children learn from everything, especially stories that are intriguing, or entertaining. In the early 1900s, Edward Bernays, a nephew of Sigmund Freud, I think it's Freud, used some of his uncle's ideas to subconsciously manipulate the people who viewed advertisements. It involved crowd psychology. Upon studying motivations that led people to do what the crowd was doing, he discovered that if the most beautiful and powerful people were doing something, others would subconsciously want to do it too. This breakthrough is then applied to the cigarette industry and to women specifically, because they smoked far less than men. As His first strategy was to encourage women to smoke instead of eat, celebrating images of thin women and gaining doctors' endorsements that said smoking is better for you than eating sweets. To stay slender, reach for a cigarette. The next step was to suggest, through imagery, that men oppressed women and that smoking cigarettes publicly would signify freedom. The cigarettes were branded as torches of freedom, which they hoped women would proudly display and consume in public. They did, in mass numbers. Years later, the author and activist Naomi Wolf exclaimed that examined the effects of these messages on women. In a research study, women were shown advertisements that featured women on various appearances, sizes, and ages, and were asked, who is most attractive? The overwhelming majority of participants pointed to the women who adhered to unrealistic, unhealthy, and compulsory ideas of beauty. Our society does reward beauty on the outside over health on the inside. A thin young woman with precancerous lungs, who smokes to stay thin, is more highly rewarded socially than a hardy old crone. Naomi Wolf, author. These stories aren't new, and they aren't limited to Disney or even to the last 100 years. But it is so obvious to see how we have been conditioned, then why don't we simply... But if it's so obvious to see how we've been conditioned, then why don't we simply choose to do something different? So many messages are imprinted from an early, impressionable age, from how we should behave to achieve a fairy tale ending, to how we're supposed to look to be considered beautiful. It seems that no matter how conscious an adult each of us grows up to be, we find ourselves tied to the fairy tale. Like any good science fiction story, where the heroine or the hero starts to figure out what's going on just in time to correct course, many women, and some men, are beginning to realize that roughly half of the human race is being manipulated. Women are beginning to see the dire need to take the story away from the storytellers and bring it back to us. And that's the end of part 1. Yeah, that was deep. I mean, they're not wrong. I would say that it's not so much about beauty, but about appreciating. So, do I completely agree with this? No, not completely, because yes, it's good for women to have their own beliefs and tell their own stories, right? Men or other people shouldn't be telling the stories of, the woman, or feminine energy. But I think it's important for women to have some physical attractiveness, and it doesn't have to be like putting on makeup, putting on a corset, dressing all tight, and basically like hurting yourself to stay thin. But to hold value in being physically fit and taking care of yourself, I don't think that's so bad. I think it's important for us to eat right so that our skin is nice, so that we stay fit and exercise, so that we don't gain weight, excessive amounts of fat. Of course, women come in all different shapes and sizes, but it's important to make sure that you're healthy. So that's my part. That's my take. Yeah, let me know what you guys think in the comments, and I'll get part 2 out soon. So stay tuned.